Introducing AdvanTech X Factor, a new premium subflooring with a built-in barrier for job site durability with AdvanTech brand's signature strength and stiffness. So whatever the expectation, go beyond with AdvanTech X Factor.
Welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. I'm Jake Bruden, and today I'm joined by Peter Yost.
Glad to be here.
And we have a special guest because this is day 2 of the 25th anniversary Westford Symposium on Building Science. Some of you may or may not know that term. Most of you that are dorks like Peter and I.
Hey.
Yeah. Since when does Peter defend himself for the word dork? Is nerd more up your alley?
One of my nieces calls me Uncle Dolt.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing.
Uncle Dolt and I are joined today by Reuben Rudisill. That thing that I was leading into that we got off track. It's Building Science Summer Camp. Everybody calls it Building Science Summer Camp. And as you heard in the last episode, when Steve and I were joined by Ross Strathuli, one of the things that we're doing is we're grabbing some of the best building science minds in the country to answer some of your Q&A questions, because we had a big stack of Q&A questions and we were like, hey, why don't we just take these to summer camp and ask somebody to postpone going straight over to Joe and Betsy's backyard to drink and come over here and sit with us for a minute. So today, Reuben is with us. Can we say that you're in RD&I? Are we allowed to say that? You're in the innovation department?
I'm in the research and development department, but it's we include the innovation in that now as one group. So we're research and development is more close in, and then that innovation is a little forward thinking.
Okay. You can see how they go together.
Yeah. And so I would say Reuben is one of the people that was dumb enough to give me his cell phone number. And so when I have questions,
I get random calls from
he gets random phone call in the middle of the day while I'm sure he's in a meeting or something.
I thought I was the only one that got to do that with
Exactly. And so I call, and then I'm like, I get I'll call you back, and I'm assuming that it's partnered with I'll call you back. So I thank you for always a subject. So you can assume, Reuben, that we are going to ask questions that probably have to do with structural panels in one way or another. Reuben has kind of been briefed on what we're going to talk about, but he's for the most part cold on some of these. And because Peter's handwriting is absolute garbage, Peter is going to read the majority of the questions, and I'm going to be here for moral support and to go, well, I didn't know that.
Wow. Thanks for the setup, Jake. But Reuben, you're in the R&D and I department, but you've done an awful lot of things for Huber, right? Over the years.
Yes. I started out as a process engineer in our commerce facility where we're manufacturing the product, and took several roles in the mill and worked there for 5.5, 6 years, and then moved down to our research and development group at that time and work on the ZIP team there in R&D.
And we've done all kinds of work together because you guys got a really strong R&D department, pretty open-minded. Okay, so one of the questions we always get is, hey, Jake, Peter, and Steve, they're always talking about, the difference between generic OSB or builder grade and then the better performing. So how does a builder distinguish between, the run-of-the-mill OSB and ones that perform better? Or what does better performing mean?
So better performing OSB, I guess the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me, Peter, is we've got our AdvanTech product, which I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with, but it has there's a PS2 standard for all structural panels.
But PS like performance standard 2?
Yes. Performance standard 2. And there's a performance standard 1 for plywood. There's a performance standard 2 for OSB panels.
Are those APA standards?
They are, yes, they're
okay.
APA, and TICO is the certification agency that we subscribe to. And they're kind of like the minimum performance standards. So everyone's kind of graded to that standard. And then with like our AdvanTech product, we have a evaluation service report through ICC, the International Code Council evaluation service, that has a level of performance that's beyond that PS2. Mm-hmm. So it's higher strength and stiffness values and fastener holding and other mechanical properties to that standard. And so due to that, there's some quality metrics that go along with that we have to run tighter tolerances on the quality standards there. And that's going to lead to a more consistent performing product across the board. So it's a higher performing standard, and it's more consistent there.
And, each of us has been to your one or more of your mills. Does the way in which your OSB is made, or you have an awful lot of testing that goes on at your mill for all the board that comes through. Is that the schedule of what you do for testing or quality assurance? I would imagine that's part of what makes your product a better board.
Yeah, so there's a tremendous amount of quality checks that are built in. So we've got process equipment controls that are monitoring the process continuously. And so that's a feedback mechanism we have. And then we have checks that are done, random checks that are random, but at the same time, it's on a set schedule,
right? Like
which they're monitoring, but they're just walking into the control room and following that press load through the end of the process, writing down all the conditions throughout the process, from the logs coming in, the strands, and the dryers, moisture contents, and they'll pull those panels and do the test on those. And so every 4 hours we're doing that, along with quality checks throughout the process that we're monitoring.
Are they monitoring things like relative humidity outside, like the weather conditions? Does that affect you guys?
The weather conditions will have an impact on kind of throughput and output of our dryers, bringing that moisture content and how the furnace runs. And so that has an impact on the moisture content, but we don't really closely track that as far as the outdoor ambient conditions.
Reuben, another question we often get is, wait a minute, what can you make oriented strand board out of? Like, are there certain species of trees that are commonly used? Does that make any difference in terms of the quality of the board?
How much does the wood basket affect what comes out the other side?
Yeah. So our wood basket is it's a product of the location of our mills. Our southern mills, we've got 4 southern mills that using southern yellow pine. And it's generally, I'd say, at most of our mills, 99.9%. There's sometimes some other poplar or sweet gum will get in there, but it's rare to ever see that kind of come in. And then
I have a sweet gum in my yard. You can have
just in cows and stuff. Those little,
they really gum up the works. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
So, and then Northern Mill is aspen based, but regardless of that, we've got that same standard that we're measuring our product to, the final product that's coming out of the mill. And that's the same across the board. And so they set the mill up to run to that standard. And that's what we focus on at the end of the day.
So, they're both softwoods, and it's based on pulling from a certain mile radius. And that's why you located the plants where you did.
Yeah. Generally the wood basket is a 50 to 75 mile radius.
Yeah.
And
so I've seen, and I've seen this from Steve, our missing co-host, a couple times.
He's missing?
Yeah. And we saw it in a presentation this afternoon about some guys using AdvanTech and AdvanTech sheathing. They were using AdvanTech in a roofing application, but I've seen it multiple times I'm guessing most of the time I've seen it is in coastal zones, high wind zones. AdvanTech sheathing is there. Why not? But first of all, I didn't know you guys made it until a few years ago. But then the question comes to bear of like, why aren't we making with the facer on the AdvanTech sheathing, or why aren't we making a Zip R product with AdvanTech sheathing, or why aren't we, you have all these different products and they don't muddle in a way that I feel like they should, I guess is what I'm saying. So like specifically, why aren't we just putting the zip coating on AdvanTech when it's sheathing or floor sheathing for that matter?
Yeah, that's a great question there, Jake. As far as the AdvanTech, it's got a higher resin, wood waxing resin loading than our Zip. We're using that same resin technology in our Zip product. So it's a little bit lower loadings, and then we've got the 7/16 half inch and 5/8 of that Zip sheathing. With our AdvanTech, it's got that higher resin loading, and it just costs more money. And we've done a little bit of market study there about putting an overlay on it. We do have an overlay on our flooring product, an X Factor product now, which is basically our AdvanTech subflooring product with a similar overlay that we have on our Zip sheathing, and that's for a flooring application.
There are so many questions I want to ask him right now that I know he will not answer on the podcast.
Well, so it's interesting. So you wanted to protect the AdvanTech floor more, so you put a polymeric coating on that, and that's even more important because it's installed flat, right? So the next question is,
wait, so
what
have you seen we should back up and say Huber is a sponsor. Just full disclosure. We also really like Reuben as a person. And that's not why we had Reuben on. We actually find this conversation very interesting and valuable. Yep. Sorry for anybody who is looking to sponsor the podcast just so that they could have one of their RDI people on. But correct me if I'm wrong, the X Factor product counts as a vapor barrier with the Hardwood Flooring Association too, right?
You're correct there, Jake. It does count as a vapor barrier. So if there's an application or a need to have a Class 2 vapor control layer there, that overlay will count as that. So if you're doing
crawl space,
crawl space, and you've got wide plank floors or whatever the application, it'll meet that requirement.
I wonder if my hardwood guy is still going to say we're putting down number 15 felt so that we can avoid squeaks still.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've always assumed that's installed that's basically a slip sheet between the finished floor and the subfloor.
But in reality, you're nailing it tight. So how much slip sheet do you get?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Well, the wider plank, you have to have the glue assist.
Yeah.
And so with that glue assist.
Yeah, you're losing that.
You can't. Yeah. Gluing the felt's not going to give you much.
Yeah. Maybe as a whole thing. So if some people are taking the AdvanTech and turning it vertical on walls, then the next question, I guess, is, well, if you've got the polymeric coating on the X Factor, could I take that and put it on my walls or my roof?
So the answer for today is no, because we have we're
going to record tomorrow?
No, there's a certification process. And so for our stamp that we get at our product stamp, that PS2 stamp is certified for a flooring product, and it's not certified as a wall sheathing product.
Got it.
So
because you haven't done the testing. It's not to say that it may or may not. It's just can we take the stance that you guys haven't done the testing yet, and that's why
we haven't gone through the certification process.
Okay. Yeah. He corrected that. He didn't say testing. He said we haven't gone through the certification process. I will note that the last time that I went to, or the only time that I've been to the facility to hang out with you guys in Commerce, we took Jackson Andrews was riding with me, and we took a wrong turn, and I was like, stop the car, like, and made him pull in. They had some things that weren't behind a gate that they were working on. that we were definitely late to what we were headed to because we stopped and fiddled. We didn't touch anything, but we definitely were like, I want to know what they're doing. I want to know what's going on.
We're going to now say that Jake
what was my answer, Jake?
We're going to label you the UnBuild It podcast subversive.
Yeah.
Okay, we do get a lot of questions about when the Zip Bar product has on the thicker end polyiso. There's a tougher fastener schedule, longer fasteners. And one question that came in was, well, really worried about overdriving those fasteners in a thicker Zip Bar panel. What do you think about two things? One is turning down the nail gun pressure so you intentionally don't sink the nail all the way and then hand nail it flush. And or what about using a screw fastener in place of the ring shank nail?
So the first question there being turning down the pressure and underdriving the nail and then coming back.
Hard pass. It's too many nails.
Well, that just is a lot of work there. If they have them driven flush at the end of the day, I mean, it's going to work and it'll be a suitable installation method, but it becomes to be a challenge on the work side.
Yeah.
And from that application standpoint,
it is the overdriving on the Zip Bar, thicker Zip Bar, sort of more of a performance issue than overdriven on just straight zip.
I don't necessarily think so. I think that, what I've seen, and this is we haven't done a tremendous amount of testing on this. But I think in many applications, the people putting the R sheathing on are, I would say, a little bit more of a craftsman or the framing crews that I see.
That's me. That's us.
That's you. He's talking about you. Oh, I'm glad you said that. I had no idea.
and typically I see a better installation as far as fastener depth with that.
So it's sort of a self-selection process on the.
Well, it's an upgraded cost on the material side, and it's an upgraded cost on the labor side. Like it stands to reason that if you're going to put a 16-foot wide window in, it's going to be a better window installed by people that are more confident.
I saw a picture of the framer. He was like 6'5", big burly, swung a 28 ounce hammer. So I don't think he's afraid of the hand driving part.
No. Okay.
And so now the screws.
The screws. The screws is something that we when we originally tested the product, we tested some large panhead head screws. And the challenge with them is you have to angle those, which you can't see my hands as I'm pointing to show that. But
it's pretty good for me on a podcast.
Yeah.
you have to angle those in. But if you can imagine that large panhead doesn't necessarily it'll sit at an angle, and it's difficult to get that tape over that.
I see.
And with the smaller screws or the smaller heads, the more typical screw with the smaller heads on them, those screws don't have the same ductility as a nail. So the nails have the ability to kind of resist that seismic load or get some seismic loading from it. So the cyclical load in a shear wall application. So if it were to get racked some or forces get applied to it, it's going to be more ductile there.
So I think what you're saying, I'm just making sure, is that the screws are more rigid in terms of that type of movement?
Yes, yes.
I thought he was calling him a duck. I'm confused.
Calling him a duck? I don't know how you get up in the morning. Okay. And then
hold on. Let's just for the 101 level listener, when we're talking about fasteners and overdriven fasteners, most times when we're talking about regular structural panel, we're talking about structural issues. They being Huber have the added challenge of, if it's a field fastener, we're also potentially affecting our WRB. So we have to be more cognizant with their product, especially in the field where it's not going to get taped, than we would have to be if we were just using a regular plywood panel or a competitor OSB that doesn't have a facer on it of some sort. I think it's important to note that we're talking about structure mainly, but as soon as we bring the zip equation in, we're also talking about our WRB. And we've proven, I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this, Reuben. We built a 5-sided box and mated it to the backside of 2 stud cavities and then plugged our blower door into it and depressurized that like 4 foot by 4 foot area or 3 foot by 3 foot area to 100 pascals of pressure for like 45 minutes and sprayed the outside of the building on the other side of the wall of the zip bar.
Down my teeth. This is wing nuts.
Did you not know this? Okay, with a garden hose, and we couldn't get it to leak, and we had a couple fasteners that were barely overdriven, but not beyond. I think you guys say about 50%. You need to be concerned.
Yeah.
Cool.
Which is probably good from a structural standpoint too, because you've eliminated half of the hold. Then, right?
If you're going 50% in, yeah, you're reducing the structural capacity of that panel significantly. You know, the APA allows up to 20% overdriven up to 1/8 of an inch. So you still have to meet that structural design capacity. So if you're overdriving nails, you at the end of the day have to add another nail. To be in compliance with the code and the performance.
So just a couple more questions, I think. The first one is that I think what the Institute for Business, Home and Safety, the IBHS, does is super cool stuff. It's a lot of research and development about how to make buildings perform better in extreme events. And, you know, I know that Huber has some sort of relationship with them. And I just thought, hey, Reuben, what do you think about IBHS and the work they do?
Yeah, they're an impressive organization. And as you alluded to, they've done a lot with wind testing, hurricane storm testing, where they've got a huge laboratory in South Carolina where they can create hurricane force winds and blow
on a full size house,
blow houses out of a building. You know, is pretty impressive. At the same time, you know, we've provided them some product to do testing on, and they have done testing on tape, sealed roof deck, and they have a fortified program.
Right, fortified, yeah.
Which there's a whole standard that goes along with that, is to create better buildings. And we've worked with them as far as some training there, and worked with Fred Malek and you know, just kind of educating some of our sales force on some of the programs that they have that are compatible with our systems.
Yeah, and I met Fred Malek through the Home Building Crossroads series because he's a part of that. Just really cool stuff on roof performance. And for our listeners, if you have not seen the video of how that lab works with the bank of like 90 turbine engine fans, I think they have to call the local utility, the electric utility, say, we're about to turn them all on.
It's also
awesome.
a fantastic, like, you know, it's just populated by a bunch of engineers that have spent 3 months getting ready for this or whatever.
Right.
And then today we sat through the 3 of us sat through a presentation where he's talking about testing 1 foot by 1 foot squares on adhesion of primers and whatnot. And I was just like, that is not the same thing that the guys that work at IBHS get to do. Like, one of them seems fun and one of them seems boring to me. They're both important.
But the other thing that's neat about the Institute for Business, Home and Safety is it's all about risk. You know, the insurance industry has a huge incentive to figure this stuff out because, you know, they have to insure these buildings. So I think it's really cool that, you know, there's sort of an alignment, you know, between sort of climate change issues and insurance and actuaries. I mean, if you want to talk about the most boring job in the world, that would be an actuary.
Actuary science.
Yeah.
Looking at data, running simulations and figuring out loss.
Yeah.
Well, and if you don't follow the work that Fred is out promoting, you're doing it wrong. Just chances are you're doing it wrong. Like, we take great pride in understanding what the manufacturers say. And I talked to Fred for 2 minutes and was like, well, crap. I am absolutely wrong in the way that we're doing a couple things that could be the difference between my roof blowing off or not.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, those things are not that costly.
No, most of them are order of operations.
Correct.
Like it's the same products. You're just putting them on in the wrong order.
Yeah, but a lot of it is like, what are the things we could do to improve that require like a very small amount of effort or change in material for really big gain?
Yeah.
Before we leave this topic of sort of questions that folks are sending in, Huber has a 800 number that people can call to get pretty bloody good technical assistance. Because you staff it with a group of engineers.
We've got a group of engineers there in our office in Charlotte, and if they don't pick it up, they'll call you back shortly. Usually, we like to say within an hour or so, but that doesn't always happen. But same day, we try to get back to everyone. So
to our listeners, if we haven't covered it here, you can call and get much better advice from people who really know what they're talking about than the UnBuild podcasters, including the Subversive.
And I talked to Mike that works up there that, oh man, is it not Mike now? I'm questioning whether or not it's
it could be. We've got two Mikes and two Nicks, and
okay. Dang it. Now I feel bad. And he said, yeah, when we first opened the call center, it was like, you'd be busy day if you got 2 phone calls. And it's not the same way now. There's still a lot more panel to a lot more people asking a lot more questions.
Okay. And then the last thing is here at the Building Science Summer Symposium, I learned about the SPS, which is the solid panel structure. And, we're a podcast, so I have to describe it in words. But basically, you are creating a structural exterior wall.
Not Huber, somebody using their products.
I'm sorry. So but the solid panel is 2.5 inches of oriented strand board, 2 different 1 inch and an 1/8 that are done perpendicular to each other. So it's cross-laminated.
Cross-laminated OSB. So if you like CLTs, kind of similar to that, it's cross-laminated panels. So
as opposed to timbers.
Yeah. And go ahead.
And so here's this 2.5 inch solid panel. And then it's called the perfect wall, or a version of the perfect wall, because everything to the exterior that is the weather resistant barrier, the rigid insulation, the furring strips, and the cladding. So why are they doing this? And, Pat Hellman is from the University of Minnesota. He's part of the group that's been working on this. And I'm pretty sure it's open source, so that anybody can explore this. But the idea was if you make modular type buildings like 24 by 32, and these panels are 8 by 24.
The ones that we sent them were 8 by 24. So 8 feet wide by 24 feet long. So some of them were obviously oriented vertical. Yeah. And then some were not horizontally oriented and put in sequence there.
But this is for real. There's a report you can get from DOE on the houses they built. And I just thought it was pretty cool that Huber, it's another example of Huber's sort of working the margins and looking for new ideas about how we build.
Yeah. Pat knew some of our folks and just reached out and asked if we would be willing to participate as a manufacturer in the DOE funded project. Mm-hmm. And so he led that project, and we were glad to be a participant in it.
And of course, plug for Pete's Resources, because I'll certainly put down the report from DOE. And I believe Martin Holliday has a blog on Green Building Advisor about it, and I'll look that up as well. So,
you use the term perfect wall, and I think we should talk very quickly about what perfect wall is.
Especially since we're here at the Building Science
since we're in Joe's house. Yeah.
So the idea of a perfect wall is that if you shelter and have all the functions except structure to the exterior of the structure, then you have a perfect wall because it is experiencing the same conditions you are as an occupant. And it'll basically live forever. It'll have very stable conditions in terms of temperature and moisture. And so Joe would often say, well, here's the perfect wall. And if I tilt it like this, it's a perfect roof. Yeah. And he used to actually take his cassette slideshow, and he would go back and yank the machine and go, "Oh, this is a perfect roof," and he'd tilt it, and then he'd flip it upside down. This is a perfect floor. I think he busted a whole bunch of slide projectors that way. But yeah, it's Joe's. It's a perfect example of Joe's application of principles. Is that how to do?
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Good description.
You bring all of your structure inside, and it's inside where nothing can bother it.
Very cool.
So,
okay, so that was about 6 to 8 questions, and Reuben, can't thank you enough for joining us on the podcast.
Appreciate being on, Peter. Jake,
tell us what you're working on in your office tomorrow. It was worth a shot to see if we just go, "Oh, okay," and start talking.
I'll give you the same answer I gave you last time, Jake.
What was that? None of your business?
You know, we got some things in the works.
Yeah,
that's generally the way Reuben says it. So, you know, we're working on some stuff.
It's cool because they tell us what we can know, and the rest we have to just stay tuned. So, very cool stuff.
I wonder how long we sat here in total silence before he would say something. Like if we could get him to talk.
I've never seen him crack, so
he's between us and the door. He could get up and leave if he wanted.
Plus, there's alcohol on the other side of the door.
Exactly.
So.
Reuben, it's a pleasure to get to work with you on stuff from time to time and to just be able to bend your ear when I have questions. And I think it's a pleasure to get to hear you talk about the products when the listeners are involved too.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate being on and appreciate being a part of the podcast and appreciate each of your friendships.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know he was going to tell people we're friends.
Well,
we can edit.
When I worked at Building Green, we used to say, if you don't like the people you're working with, why bother?
Well, so there you go.
I'm pretty much done with this podcast.
Okay. Why bother?
And I just slammed the table.
Yeah, you did. Sorry for your ears, listeners. Okay. Thank you guys for both joining me today. We do have to wrap it up because there is food and wine and booze and music that needs tending to. Stay tuned because we're going to attempt to do one more tomorrow with another surprise guest that you weren't expecting.
And surprise guest is like we surprised them.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we surprised Reuben. So don't forget the Q&A questions come from you. Pete very eloquently edited a bunch of these that applied to Reuben so that we could get through a bunch quick. But I brought like 14 pages worth of questions with me that I was just like, oh, we can feed these to some of the experts that we know. And we got those questions because they came to us from questions@unbuilditpodcast.com. Email them. They come to us. I will be perfectly honest. We answer most of them on the podcast, but Pete answers most of them before we get to him on the podcast because we know you're waiting for the questions, and he's the most gullible when it comes to us asking for his time. The one that's retired does the most work.
Do you know why I do it? It's because you guys are doing the social media, which takes a bunch of time, and I don't do that. So
I'll do Instagram,
I should
and
do
you
the
can
Q&A because it's also old fashioned. So.
Pete has no idea that our Instagram account's been deleted. That's how often he's on.
Is that different than Twitter? Did you get kicked off Elon Musk thing? All right, I should be quiet now.
On that note, thanks for listening. Have a wonderful day.